I think that we have a very, in his day, there was a very divided Orthodox mission. And I think in the maybe last 37, 38 years, fortunately, everything's got much better until very recently. Until maybe within the last year and a half or so. And to spend time, sometimes, I think in his day, we're dealing with that our access to the treasures of the Orthodox faith was such a big struggle. And that's not our struggle today. We have today, we've kind of gone back to the divisiveness out of which the church was coming in the 1970s. I think maybe if he had had the chance to form more common cause with like-minded missionaries and educators and people proclaiming the Orthodox faith, then maybe he would have done that. He didn't have an opportunity in his day, for example, he did not know that within 3 to 4 years after his repose, that Christianity in the former Soviet Union would absolutely blossom. And so, in a way, he was still kind of addressing a legacy from the early 20th century of kind of trying to combat the problems that I think that were assumed were really handcuffing the church in Eastern Europe. I think there's things that he would maybe review. There's also, for example, there were people with whom he was corresponding who really may have influenced how he saw the mission of the church at his time. And, I think you can get to, I think also he used some of his time having to address the teachings and errors of some other people who, in a way, maybe he could have used his time much better. So yes, I think definitely it's quite possible. What specifically? I don't know if there's really to pinpoint that. I think also that he didn't, and one of the things he lacked is he actually lacked a well-rounded theological education that maybe wasn't just available to him at his time. He had to kind of teach himself in a way. He didn't have, what he had to learn about the Orthodox Church. He learned from a kind of a limited, you could say limited gene pool per se, and a limited experience of the church, because shortly after, within a couple of years after his repose, we had large groups of people coming to the Orthodox Church. We had hundreds and really thousands of churches being opened up, and people were thirsty to learn. And maybe that really wasn't happening precisely at the end of the 1980s, end of the 1970s, beginning of the 1980s, but everything changed within about 6-7 years. And so I think he would have responded in a much different way if he had had that opportunity to respond to the questions and needs that people had, even short 5 years later. All right, as the saying goes, nothing finer than life in Platina. Okay, so a lot of those things were moved to his cell after he reposed. Okay, some of those things weren't there when he was living. And number one. Number two, we live actually between his time, around his time and now. We've been under this influence that we have a lot of new time-saving devices. Don't believe it. We live amidst distraction, voluntary distraction. And if a person is raised well, taught well, they learn to focus, they learn to pay attention, they learn to read carefully. They actually learn to write well and think clearly. And actually I think he had that background in formation, where he learned how to study, how to read, how to pay attention, how to write, how to express himself clearly, and how to think clearly. And the opposite of that is a life of distraction, thinking that with all these time-saving gadgets and devices, we're quote-unquote saving time or saving money. And so we've come to the end of that now, where we realize our lives are cluttered. We have so much stuff that one of the big businesses is storage units, and one of the big activities is garage sales, etc., and estate sales. And we're choking ourselves out of existence. So, yes, he was able to simply, and one of the great things he did, by the way, one of the things he loved to do, since he was a graduate at UC Berkeley, is every few months to go down to the library in Berkeley, and as a graduate student there for alumni, he was able to check books out of the library there, and he valued that. And he always had some interesting thing that he borrowed or later photocopied. You remember the old days, the photocopy machine, Kinko's, etc., all those kind of that bygone era. Okay, and he had all these fabulous things that he would collect and research and read. And this process of study brought to him clarity. Instead of this pile of information or this digital maze. And I think that also it pours over into the spiritual life, where you're simply able to focus, stand up and pray, make prostrations, reflect. And when you're in church, instead of simply being bombarded by thoughts and other information and ideas, you need to pour forth your heart. So he was able to do this. And yes, his cell was not the same when he was alive. He actually was able to use his bookshelves after he reposed. Things that had actually belonged to him were brought to his cell. Okay? However, it still was cramped and tight. And yes, the building was substandard, etc., and later had to be lifted up and the foundation improved, and that's to be understood. All right. Okay. So now, many of the things about which he wrote are things about which he was asked to write. Again, they'll go back to the late 1970s. There were a lot of questions that people were asking at that time. There was almost no books on soul after death, life after death, eschatology, etc. And there were lots and lots of things being written in the world around us at that time on these questions. It's like today when you think, oh, the church needs to respond to this question. Okay, well, where are you going to get a book like that? Who had a book like, and some of the things that appeared in print were totally unsatisfactory. So he has asked to write a whole series of articles on these questions. Some of it, he's able to write these articles and put them in a book form. Other materials had in preparation that were never put in a book form or companion book form. Now, also at that time, in response to some of these articles, which have been serialized in the periodical, The Orthodox Word, there also been some pushback by some other people. And so he had to spend disproportionate time responding to some of these critics. Now, I would say this is that in some aspects of the teaching of the soul after death, there are, some of the material is taken from not the creed, but church services, lives of saints, a sermon, or something like that. And there are, for example, types of images that are used. There's things, for example, that haven't been revealed. For example, how do the saints reign with God? All right? How are the dead going to rise from the grave? The voice of the last trumpet, what does that mean? So not all these questions are very crystal clear either in Scripture or in our dogmatic statements. So Herman's question in that sense is quite apropos. And those are some of the things about which Father Seraphim is kind of most criticized. So that's why he has made this comment, okay? So, for example, if the basis of a somehow doctrinal teaching is a vision, okay, that's like, for example, having the basis of your doctrine of salvation based on a rhetorical question, okay? Such as, for example, Calvinism, all right? So, there are some things that, for us that are very clear, that have been clarified by the councils of the church. For example, the union in two natures, God and man in Jesus Christ. And for example, things like that are the most clarified teachings of our church. There are other things set forth by the church that have not been as clearly set forth or described. All right? And some things are celebrated in our creed, our symbol of faith, that have not only been proclaimed by the ecumenical councils, but received and used even in a very central liturgical manner, about which there can be no doubt or question. Others, for example, we have, for example, in the creed itself, we have a statement, and became man, and the next phrase is, and he was crucified for us under Pontius Pilate. So you have the becoming man and crucified under Pontius Pilate. You have a little bit of a gap there. The rest of that has to be filled in, and it's not filled in our creed. So there are some things in which the councils go and very clearly set forth how he is both God and man. So other things that are not described, that is, his going through Galilee and teaching, etc., and that leaves it open, for example, to people trying to reconstruct the chronology of how many years he preached and ministered, or how many times he actually visited Jerusalem, to try to create some sort of harmony between all the evangelists. So some things are set forth very clearly in the teaching and doctrinal statements of the church. Other things are not quite set forth so clearly in the doctrinal statements of the church.